Now here's something that will really rub you wrong.
Yes, it's one of our favorites. It's called Mad Monster.
Oh, it's got a neat little laboratory tucked behind a bookcase and a couch you can strap victims to.
Yes, and the screen is alive with crepe hair and spirit gum.
Oh, and we have the second installment of Rocket Men on the Moon. Oh.
Yes, this one is called The Molten Terror.
This time we watch Season 1, Episode 3, The Mad Monster.
There's like a werewolf. I don't know. You can skip this one.
We've also got a short, Part 2 in the continuing story of Radar Men from the Moon.
Yeah, that happens too. Oh boy.
Seriously.
Oh boy.
I hope we have some follow-up that's better than our feature presentation today, Chris.
Me too. We're going to have some fun stuff to say about this episode, I'm sure, even though in a word, I would describe this episode as inessential. But yeah, we got some feedback. We got a message from devoted listener Greg about Hell's a Poppin'.
Ooh, so this is really for Beth. Beth, I hope you're listening.
Yeah, Beth, you better be listening.
Yeah.
All right. So Greg says, hello, everybody. I wanted to respond to the question of why the MST3K people were not that familiar with the Hell's a Poppin' movie and the Olsen and Johnson duo. And I don't want to read the whole thing, but basically, the movie went into kind of a rights limbo in the early 60s. So it was very popular for a bit. People loved it. The show had made a lot of money on Broadway, and then the movie made some money, but then it got tied up in weird rights issues, and they were relaunching it on Broadway, and that didn't go very well. I'll put a link that Greg sent to a really interesting blog post about this whole thing, but basically, Joel and everybody at Best Brains probably never saw Hell's a Poppin'.
Would they have known it existed even?
Well, in the Amazing Colossal Episode Guide, Paul Chaplin talks about it as if it's a movie he's only read about, and he says that Trace's dad went and saw Olsen and Johnson once and thought they were funny.
Huh. Okay.
So yeah, it's totally one of those things where, like, now, when everything's at our fingertips, we just assume, of course, everybody would have seen Hell's a Poppin'. How could they have not liked it?
Seriously, how could they not?
But it was much harder to see it back then.
Yeah.
And yeah, it turns out that there are perfectly good reasons why they were unfamiliar with this little weird movie.
Yeah, that makes so much more sense, because I have to say, like, this seems to be so much in the vein of other things that they reference all the time that when I was talking with Beth, it just seems so weird that they would have no knowledge of it, you know? It's like related to vaudeville, it's related to early film. It just seemed like something that's way in the wheelhouse of the Best Brains crew.
Have you had a minute to watch it yet?
I have not had a minute to watch it yet. No.
Okay. Well, report back when you have, if you choose to. If you choose to. I didn't watch the Portland Expose movie yet, so, you know.
Fair enough. I did watch the Lindy Hop scene from Hell's a Poppin' because you sent me that as its own exclusive clip, and oh my God, that thing is amazing.
It's real good.
It really is. I can't imagine what's happening in the rest of it, because you said that the Lindy Hop scene was so different from the rest of it. Like, there were no gags or anything like that. It was just super, super athletic dancing and amazing music. So it was entirely worth the watch.
Yeah, in the movie, it sort of serves unofficially as like the intermission or the entr'acte, splitting the movie more or less in half of like the silly slapstick sketch comedy nonsense on either side of it. So yeah, it just has a very different tone, but it is remarkable. If you see nothing else, you did. But listeners, if you see nothing else, watch that clip. Hunt it down on your local YouTube. You can probably find it, if not even more of Hell's a Poppin' on YouTube.
Excellent.
But I guess we get to talk about this episode now. This time we watch Season 1, Episode 3, The Mad Monster.
But first, a short, Radar Men from the Moon, Chapter 2, Molten Terror. Commando Cody is in a big fight with some guys, but he fights his way free and escapes. Once outside, he uses a jetpack to fly back to his ship, and he reports to his crew about Reddick, the evil ruler of the moon, and his plan to invade the Earth. They must thwart this plan because these guys have super powerful weapons. Hey, why not steal one of these and use it against the baddies? Commando Cody decides they should steal a ray gun, but it's so heavy, it'll take 2 guys to carry it. So Cody takes a friend along. They use nitrous oxide, no joke, in the ventilation system to put everyone in the bad guy compound to sleep so Commando Cody can steal the ray gun. It doesn't quite work because some bad guys have access to oxygen. Anyway, they have a fight, Commando Cody wins, and he takes the gun. He has to carry it, though, and the bad guys send a tank out after him. Commando Cody and his friend take refuge in a cave, but the tank turns its heat ray on the cave entrance, melting the rocks into a lava flow heading right for Commando Cody. How will he escape? Could this be the end?
And now for our feature presentation. Stop me if you've heard this one before. There's a maverick scientist, Dr. Lorenzo Cameron, who has been kicked out of the university because his scientific theories are highly unnatural and immoral. Angry at his detractors, Dr. Lorenzo decides he's going to show them once and for all that his science is real. Which, like the other scientists, never really doubt. They just think maybe you shouldn't do it. And what is this unnatural thing Dr. Lorenzo is trying to do? In the words of his gardener, Pedro, who also happens to be his test subject, that's right, Dr. Lorenzo is injecting Pedro with various serums that turn him into a werewolf. As a human, Pedro is gentle and kind, if a little slow. But as a werewolf, Pedro becomes a killing machine. He even takes down the ultimate prey, a little girl. Boo! Well, in the morning, Pedro can't remember what he did last night as a werewolf. From Dr. Lorenzo's perspective, this is a triumph. He's making a note here. Huge success. And now he's ready to prove to his detractors that his science works by having Pedro kill each one of them. While that's happening, Dr. Lorenzo's adult daughter, Lenora, is in love with Tom, a reporter who's trying to track down the mysterious killing of that little girl. Tom begins to suspect Dr. Lorenzo, and when he finally confronts him, well, things get a little hairy. Like a wolf man. Pedro goes wolf man, and he knocks everything over in the lab, and there's a big fire, and Pedro kills Dr. Lorenzo, and Tom and Lenora escape, and I guess that's the end.
Meanwhile, on the Satellite of Love, we open on an exchange between 2 scientists telling the story of how or why they went mad. Dr. Earhart wanted students, but only got monkeys. Monkeys! Dr. Forrester can't remember if it was the ice capades or soft serve that made him a scientist, but it's implied that he's always been mad. It's invention exchange time, and Joel has a purse to punish thieves. It spurts flames when it's opened. Hell in a handbag. The Mads have made a toy just as dangerous as kids really want. A dinosaur that spurts flames from its mouth and eyes. Who wouldn't want that? Boy, a lot of things are catching on fire this week. At a break from the movie, Tom has decided to hit on a blender. Apparently, he hits on all the mechanical things on the Satellite of Love. This blender has all the qualities Tom wants in a lady friend, like 11 speeds. Except this really is just a blender, so Joel crushes his dreams, and Tom goes off to mistakenly hit on a Mr. Coffee. In the episode's best sketch, the bots can't get over the missing details about the wolfman's eating habits. Is he actually eating his victims or just mauling them? can a wolfman eat a whole human? What if he's a vegetarian? Does he start rampaging victory gardens? What if he ordered a hoagie and there's a hair in it? Joel has to remind them that this is science fiction, so these questions just don't have answers, or rather the answers could be anything. The bots then ask if an animal has ever been turned into a human being, and though Joel can't think of any, the bots sure can. At movie break, Joel has switched Tom and Crow's heads, so now Tom's head is on Crow's body and vice versa. Tom accuses Joel of doing this just to make the pun Servo-Croatian, but the plan backfires as Tom and Crow merge into one megabot mind, Voltron style. One megabot with an off switch. The movie's over and Joel is offering RAM chips for a good and a bad thing about today's movie. But the bots have too many questions, like when Pedro died, did they call the doctor or the vet? Joel threatens to give the RAM chips to GPC, who wasn't even in the theater, which makes Tom and Crow mad, but then they devolve into a discussion about bots having free will and pan-dimensional beings and Joel being an Uberman. Joel asks the Mads if they're pleased now, but of course they aren't. Can't you see a mad scientist has died? What do you think, sirs?
Okay, so can you name a good thing and a bad thing about this episode?
A good thing and a bad thing about this episode. I enjoyed all of the riffs that were about dogs and pointing out the doggish nature of Pedro. Like, oh, it's a doggy door. Go outside, boy. Go outside, boy. That's a good boy. That's a good boy. So there's a good thing.
Is that because you want somebody to talk to you like that sometimes so that you know you're a good boy?
No. I mean, I would like the goodness of myself to be acknowledged sometimes. I can't deny that. But mostly just because it was clever and funny, a lot of the ways that they brought up the way people talk to their animals and treat their animals different from people. And it was definitely the case, like the scientist was treating Pedro like a dog all the time, not just when the experiment was going. So I thought they were pointing out something interesting that was happening in the movie.
Oh, there's even that moment when he's in human form, let's say, and the doctor says to him, "You're not supposed to be in this part of the house.
Get out! Get out now!"
Ugh, what a not nice guy he is.
What a not nice guy.
So that's a good thing.
That's a good thing. A bad thing about the episode. What's a bad thing from the movies for the movie? And this is really for me, like it wasn't necessarily, the movie doesn't think it's bad, but there's a scene where the doctor dad has his doctor friend over and they're chatting on the way in. And then his daughter comes over to greet them, just like, being a good hostess. And she's like, well, everything you talk about is just way over my head, so I'm going to leave you alone. And then the scientist friend is like, oh, and I promised to use only 2-syllable words so that you could stay in the conversation. And it was like, shove it up your mister, because that's just not very nice. Like, that is ridiculous. That's how you're treating, like, the only female, well, okay, not the only female, because we have, Whistler's grandma in the rocking chair who was getting stoned. That was hilarious, too. I can name 2 good things about the episode. 2 good things.
Okay. I get to decide now whether I am going to leave your silence there as silence or cover it up with a very long bleep. The listeners already know what I chose. All right, for me, I'm going to start with the bad thing, which is the audio quality of this movie.
Ooh.
It's got so much, it's not tape hiss, but that's the same idea. It's that white noise that covers up certain recordings, which I feel like nowadays would be relatively easy to clean up, but there's a certain really rough era for cheap film in the late 30s and early 40s. This is from 1942.
And in 1989, they were not cleaning up the audio.
Yeah. And while there are some movies from that era with very good audio, there's also several with very bad audio.
Mm-hmm.
The good thing I would like to say about this episode is that there are a few moments in it where I don't know whether it was the stress of now being on kind of national television, not available in most markets, but nevertheless, coast-to-coast coverage. Now that they are on a cable channel, or whether it's the stress of that or whether it's just like something going wrong that day. But both Joel and Crow have moments where they make errors that are left in the episode.
Like Joel calls Crow Tom at one point in time.
So that happens, but I'm thinking more of, okay, so my understanding is that the scripts that they're reading from look like they show the line that is going to be from the movie. That'll be the cue for them to say their line, right? And while they do practice this a bit, they are still looking at their scripts. Well, I don't remember anyone ever doing this in any other episode, but at some point, Joel starts saying the line of dialogue as the actor says it.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even notice.
And then he catches himself midway through, and then he has to finish it, and then he says the riff afterwards, and it's incredibly awkward.
How do you feel?
Just like I always do. Kind of dopey.
Oh, it's so good. And then similarly, there's a moment not too long after that. Maybe this was after lunch and they'd had a little too much to eat or something. I don't know. But not too long after that, Crow starts telling his joke before the prompt. So he's supposed to say a joke when a character comes onto screen, and he starts saying the joke early, and then he has to vamp until the character shows up to explain what's going on. And he tries to cover for it. It's great.
Looks like, I don't know if you could tell in that shot, but I think Pedro's doing something new with his hair. Maybe some new mousse.
You don't get to see that level of whoopsies that often on this show, especially when you're not in the KTMA era.
Yeah, well, no. How could you? They'd scripted it so much, and they could go back and change things.
Yeah, I don't know whether they were just on a very tight schedule then or what. I have no idea. But it's delightful. I love seeing it. This is not a great episode otherwise.
It's not my least favorite episode. It did have some nice things about it.
Sure.
Like the riffing had some fun things. And it's been a really long time since I've seen an episode with Dr. Earhart and with Tom's original voice. Because we've been jumping around in so many seasons. We've seen different hosts and different people being all the bots and everything. And it just feels different to come to a season 1 episode now, because it just feels like, oh, it's the same host, but there's different people doing the bots. So there's a different dynamic in the room. And that was interesting.
You know, it was about a year ago when we watched the KTMA episode Humanoid Woman, in which there's a sketch where Tom hits on a blender.
Yep. Yeah. And I didn't like it then, and I didn't like it now.
I think it's a little better this time around, but that is splitting hairs.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there was tomato juice in the blender this time. So it changed the comedy completely, Chris. Totally changed it.
I guess so. So.
Nope.
Season 1 can be good. This is not the best example of it.
No, but it's not an example of like, oh my God, I can't believe this show made it past season 1. Like, there's a lot of like little glimpses of how clever and how fun this show can be.
Sure.
So it's not an episode that's going to convince everybody to be a like loyal watcher all the time, but it's not one that's going to scare you away from the show either entirely. Well, maybe Radar Men from the Moon would.
Would you believe this short takes place on the moon?
If you hadn't told me it was the moon, I would not have known.
Did the title not give you a hint that it was Radar Men from the Moon?
Again, all of those things helped to just clue me in that it was the moon, but otherwise, it just looked like a castle in a desertish place.
Yeah, I mean, they really threw us for a loop by not shooting in Bronson Canyon, but in some other canyons just outside of LA.
I mean, come on. There is one canyon that is recognizable as the moon, people.
I think it's interesting because, of course, okay, the Radar Men from the Moon comes from 1952, at which point, while we had seen the moon, since we had seen it since prehistoric times hanging up there in the sky, we had not been to the moon. And we didn't necessarily know what it would look like, especially if we're imagining a sort of science fictional place where there are people living on there and having home bases and cruel plans to destroy the world with powerful weapons and whatever that would require.
Well, I mean, if you don't live on the Earth, aren't you jealous? Come on, like this is the best place. It's real sweet. It's got nice water. There's super good food. Like, yeah, if you don't live here, of course you're jealous and you want to destroy it.
Well, there's that, but I guess I'm more thinking about what the landscape of the moon is going to be like.
Oh, yes, of course.
Because this isn't the only film to take place on the moon from the 50s that just makes it look like part of California.
Well, the whole world tends to look like California if you believe the movies.
And I'm not saying it needs to be like perfect to be effective. I'm not saying this is effective, but I'm not saying that's a requirement for a movie set on the moon that has to look like the moon. But it is interesting how the moon may or may not look like the moon, right? So I recently had a chance to rewatch a very nice color print, the original color print, of the very early film Le Voyage dans la Lune, A Trip to the Moon by Georges Méliès.
The one that has the rocket go in the eyeball?
The famous Rocket in the Eyeball short. And if you've never seen the original color edition, the hand-colored edition, it's obviously not filmed in color, but they would frame by frame paint in the colors.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's a stunning effect. I mean, most old films that I've seen that do that sort of wash the entire scene in a particular color because that's faster and easier and perhaps more reliable. But
Sure.
sometimes you get to see very nice editions where it's all sort of hand colored in. And it can be very lovely. And it made the film so much easier to read and parse and figure out what's going on.
Oh. I don't think I've ever seen it colorized. Like, what kinds of things were, like, brought out by that color?
It makes it a lot easier to tell things that are in the foreground from the background.
Oh, that is helpful, yeah.
And so you get a better sense of composition. Let's put it that way.
Okay, that makes sense.
I'll send you a still shot of the famous moment.
Oh, yeah. Dude. The rocket being red going into kind of a orangey yellow moon with the unhappy lips and the green clouds around it. Like it's really stunning.
Yeah.
Oh, and it looks like the moon is kind of bleeding a little bit.
Yes, I think it does splurt out a little bit in that shot. I mean, I know it definitely is in that image.
I don't think I ever would have thought of the moon as having bodily fluids, right? Like when things hit the moon in our imagination, like there's dust particles that go out, right? So if this wasn't colorized, I wouldn't have thought of it as like a bodily fluid. I would have thought of it as just like dust particles or something, you know?
Yeah, you can't really tell what it's supposed to be in the black and white version, and that makes perfect sense. And of course, it's dust because they're playing with the idea of it being the man in the moon, the face that you see in the moon. And if you hit the face, what's going to happen? But also, I think one of the interesting things is that the moon looks different. I mean, it doesn't quite necessarily look like what we now know the moon's surface to look like, but it looks more aggressively weird than California because it's being filmed on a soundstage rather than out in the real world. And so they're able to use all the crafts of the theater in order to make it look weirder. And I'll send you a few more images of that.
Ooh. Yeah, you do get some really interesting canyon effects. I'm looking at a picture of a woman who is sitting on a crescent of a moon, and there's a planet with rings around it in the background, and there's a couple of ladies holding up a star, and there's this nice canyon effect with some craters inside of it, which is really interesting. Oh, my goodness. Yeah, it's lovely. And look, there's water on the moon. They had water on the moon in this movie?
I believe so. It's been a few months since I rewatched it, and I was just more drinking in the spectacle of how beautiful this film was rather than trying to remember all these kinds of particular details. But yeah, I think there's a bit of a water in it, or that might be back on Earth. I can't remember because they do land back on Earth at the end of it.
Oh, it does look like there's a moon in the sky reflecting on the water, so maybe it is back on Earth.
And I just sent you a black and white version of that same shot with the women just to see how harder it is to read what's going on in the black and white version.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, that's the version I'd always seen. It's so much better if you watch it in color.
It seems like it's so much fun when it's in color. I mean, not that it isn't fun when it's black and white, right? There's a reason why people have continued to watch this short, just seeing that imaginary trip to the moon before we were ever able to really make it happen.
Absolutely. Are there any depictions of the moon that you are particularly fond of, especially ones from before we'd been there?
I was reading some articles from like NASA and some science magazines when they were thinking about what to expect when they actually landed on the moon, trying to think about like, how did we conceive of the moon before we physically felt it as a culture, right? And one of the things that was super fascinating to me, because it just never occurred to me, right? Like, I was born after we landed on the moon.
Right.
So this idea of what the moon is had already been solidified before I was born. And apparently they did not know how fluffy the surface of the moon was going to be. They weren't sure whether it was going to be just like dust on a countertop, like just a very small layer that as soon as you land, you're kind of on a solid footing, or whether it was going to be like several feet thick and astronauts would step out of their module and just sink like quicksand into the dust particles of the moon. Like, they didn't know, because how could they know? They'd never physically been there. And so they designed the feet of the lunar landing module to have like a very large kind of snowshoe foot so that it could sit on top of everything. And that was just fascinating to me because it's just like, it never occurred to me that we didn't know what the moon felt like.
So there's not much from familiar faces for this movie, but two of the actors do have a bit of a reputation outside of this particular film. Dr. Lorenzo Cameron is played by George Zucco, who played an evil mad scientist type, I guess, in a lot of these kinds of movies. And Pedro is played by Glenn Strange, who had a pretty long career, but also sometimes played sort of your larger, more monstrous characters.
That or Westerns, apparently. And strangely, right?
I mean, were they so different back in the 50s? They were the two most popular genres, it feels like, were sci-fi horror films and Westerns. Occasionally they combined and you got dinosaurs and cowboys.
I mean, we've all been there, am I right?
But I thought, wouldn't it be nice if there was another movie that starred these two together? And wouldn't you know, there is another movie that has both of them together. And I thought, I don't want to watch it. I'll make Charlotte watch it.
And I did.
Tell me about it. Was it any good?
Well, as you promised, it was better than this movie. The House of Frankenstein has a mad scientist. It has Dracula. It has Frankenstein's monster. And it has the Wolf Man.
Uh-huh.
How could it fail? It was not good, Chris. Like, I would not describe this movie as good.
Oh.
Because, first off, George Zucco, who plays the doctor in The Mad Monster, is in it for about 3 to 5 minutes. In the very beginning, he is the head of a traveling horror show that has the bones of Dracula.
Ooh.
I know, right? And the main character, the main mad scientist, who's played by Boris Karloff, no less, has just escaped from prison with his sidekick helper, who is a hunchback. They run into a traveling horror show. Then they go inside and they're chatting with the guy who's in charge, and that's George Zucco. And he basically is like, yeah, I'm heading to these towns. And they're like, you're not heading to these towns? He's like, no, I'm not going there. Those are small towns. And they're like, well, you are now. Strangle, strangle, strangle. And that's the end of George Zucco being in the movie.
Okay.
They don't even keep his body. They've been talking about making Frankenstein and reanimating dead bodies, but they don't even keep his dead body to reanimate later. He's just gone.
You could probably find a better body than George Zuko's.
Well, I don't know. They're usually digging dead bodies up from the graveyard.
I guess they wouldn't get a fresher body, you're right.
So you can't get a fresher body.
You gotta pick them yourself.
I guess so. Yes, exactly. I mean, certainly he's not going to be the strongest. And, Boris Karloff has promised his hunchback sidekick that he's going to get him an awesome body, a nice strong body to move his brain into.
Okay.
Yeah.
So his assistant should get a say into what body he ends up in.
So that becomes a problem later on in the film.
Okay.
But for right now, they're traveling with the bones of Dracula. They go to a small town. They unstake the bones of Dracula, and they sick Dracula on the guy they want to kill.
And Dracula is played by
John Carradine.
Yes.
Which is amazing. He is so good.
So you got Boris Karloff, you've got John Carradine.
Yes. And then the Dracula storyline ends.
Oh.
Because Dracula gets greedy and wants a girlfriend, and that doesn't work out and the police are chasing them. So Boris Karloff is I'm just going to dump Dracula's coffin right here, and Dracula's out of the picture. And he totally is, because he's trying to get in his coffin when the sun comes up. And that's it for John Carradine. He doesn't get to interact with the Wolfman, and he doesn't get to interact with Frankenstein. And I was promised the three monsters, and I don't get them together, which is unfortunate, but that's okay.
It's how it happens with these cameo films, right? I mean, remember Angel's Revenge? You didn't get to see all of those great actors together in one shot.
It's so true. What was I thinking? But then, you do get to see the Wolfman and Frankenstein together, because essentially Boris Karloff hasn't been able to reanimate dead bodies himself, so he needs to merge his work with Frankenstein's. So he's trying to get Frankenstein's notes. They go to the town where Frankenstein's ruins are, because of course, the townspeople totally burnt down the castle and, flooded the place and everything. Fine. So they get his notes because they go into the castle trying to get to the notes, and they end up in this frosty glacier cave in the caves behind the house. It's so weird. But inside of there, the Wolfman is frozen and Frankenstein's monster is frozen.
Oh, were they making out?
They were not. They're frozen separately, but it would have been adorable if they were making out. Oh my gosh. No, it turns out that the Wolfman went to Dr. Frankenstein because he thought Dr. Frankenstein might be able to help him to not be a Wolfman anymore.
Right.
Right? To take his brain and put it on a new body so that he didn't have the Pentagon mark of the beast on him or whatever. Anyway, didn't work out for him. He's frozen in the glacier anyway. Boris Karloff and his assistant melt them in order to have the Wolfman and Frankenstein's monster join their party.
Now, Glenn Strange, who plays the Wolfman in The Mad Monster, does not play the Wolfman here, right?
No, Glenn Strange is Frankenstein's monster. Lon Chaney Jr. is the one who's playing the Wolfman, which I think is a role he's done before or will do again.
Yes, he had played the Wolfman earlier, and he'd also played Frankenstein's monster earlier, as well as Count Alucard in Son of Dracula.
Ooh.
So he's played many of these roles.
See, so I at the casting call, how did he choose which one he wanted to be?
I bet he didn't have much of a choice.
No, he probably didn't. He was probably told, and you'll play the Wolfman. So it turns out Boris Karloff's character is not real honest. I know that's really hard to believe. He is a mad scientist out for revenge, but he's not a very honest mad scientist.
Oh.
So he's told the Wolfman that he's going to help him find a new body. And he's told his assistant that he's going to help him find a new body. But instead, what he wants to do is to get to the next town with Frankenstein's papers, Frankenstein's monster, and the Wolfman, go back to his original home, Boris Karloff's home, and continue his own experiments, and get revenge on the last two people who he needs to get revenge on. And what he does is he has his assistant kill those two guys to enact his revenge, and then he removes their brains. And what he wants to do to get revenge is put the brains of his nemesis in Frankenstein's monster and in the Wolfman. And that's going to be his revenge.
That's much too complicated.
I know, right?
Just kill them. It's fine.
But that's the thing. He did kill them, and now he's going to make it worse. Because it's not enough just to kill. He's mad. He's mad, I tell you. He can't just kill them. That's not enough revenge.
If I died and then I woke up in Frankenstein's monster's body or the Wolfman's body, I don't know if I would find that worse. It'd be different, but I don't think I'd find it worse than death.
Well, I have to say, Lon Chaney Jr. definitely sells the Wolfman as a fate worse than death. He does a really good job of this character being a person who turns into a wolf when the full moon rises, and he kills people and he can't control it. And it is knowing that he's going to go out and kill people, but not being able to stop it. Knowing that he would kill somebody he loved as the Wolfman because he could not help himself. And they have this whole side thing with a pretty girl who's fallen in love with him and who kills him with a silver bullet that she makes from her own jewelry.
Aww.
It's very sad. I know, right? And the whole storyline is he's going to stay a wolfman until someone who loves him enough kills him and releases him from this torment. There's a whole poem thing.
Tale as old as time.
Yes, it's one of those.
Well, that sounds sweet. I like that subplot.
Oh, and then you know how the mad scientist ends up dying?
Autoerotic asphyxiation?
Almost. It's really close. His assistant starts to strangle him because assistant is like, you're never going to give me the body that I want. I'm mad at you. I'm going to kill you. And then Frankenstein's monster breaks free from his bonds. It's the first time we get to see Glenn Strange doing anything, right? Because he's just been strapped to a table the whole time. So he breaks free. He kills the assistant. He picks up Boris Karloff and he starts walking off into the woods in order to save him. And they walk straight into a bog because the villagers with torches send them in that direction. And he walks into quicksand and they fall into the quicksand, just like the beast of Hollow Mountain.
Hey everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
It's time for the Shallow 13. 13 little howls at the moon, all about today's experiment, the Mad Monster. Go, Charlotte, go!
In addition to playing Frankenstein's monster, Pedro's actor, Glenn Strange, is best known for being in that other Western, Gunsmoke, where he played bartender Sam Noonan, which, good for him and all, but it's no Bonanza.
Yep, no one in the Mad Monster appeared in Bonanza. Or Murder, She Wrote. But here's a strange coincidence. Not only does Glenn Strange appear in this film, but a guy named Robert Strange plays one of the professors who ridiculed Dr. Lorenzo's unethical science. But Glenn Strange and Robert Strange do not appear to be related. Strange.
Our director, Sam Newfield, was a specialist in pumping out films on a shoestring budget with a quick turnaround, and so naturally, several of his films appeared on MST3K over the years. If The Mad Monster wasn't your cup of tea, consider Lost Continent, I Accuse My Parents, or Radar Secret Service.
During the credits to Radar Men from the Moon, Crow quips,
Dale Van Sickle never made a bad film.
He never made a real film.
Okay, Tom, settle down. Don't make me bring Beth back on to explain how the Marx Brothers' Duck Soup is comedy gold, even if it has an uncredited appearance by Dale Van Sickle.
In fact, Dale Van Sickle has over 350 acting credits on IMDb, though most are for incredibly small roles. And some of them are forgettable serials, like Radar Men from the Moon, or Dangers of the Canadian Mounted, about a scramble to find Genghis Khan's buried treasure on the Alaska-Canada border.
Dangers of the Canadian Mounted is directed by Fred C. Brannon, the same guy who gave us Radar Men from the Moon. So keep that in mind if you are momentarily intrigued. maybe you're better off rewatching The Love Bug. You know, that Disney movie about Herbie, the Volkswagen Beetle with a mind of its own? Because Dale Van Sickle is in that too, Tom. And I don't know that there's any film more real than The Love Bug.
Meanwhile, in The Mad Monster, Dr. Lorenzo imagines he's talking to his detractors in the lab, and when those spectral visitors disappear, Crow says,
They left. He should have served drinks. Canapes, those little sandwiches with the crust cut off. Nut cups.
I'm sorry, nut cups? Listener, maybe you live in a land of nut cups, but I had to look it up. Turns out they're little tarts filled with nuts in a sort of brown sugar and egg mixture. We'll have a recipe linked in the show notes.
Fun fact, if you Google Wiki Nut Cup, the top result is the Wikipedia article for jockstraps. Google, you used to be good at this. What happened? Okay, this is very funny, but come on, what happened?
As some guys carry a professor's body into Dr. Lorenzo's house, Joel says,
It's a shivaree.
A shivaree is a good word to stump your friends with at your next festive spelling bee. Shivaree. Charivari. Shivaree.
Chivalry, also known as rough music, is one of those fun small-town traditions that originate from the Middle Ages, if not earlier, where everybody in town mobs on a person they don't like and drags them around, making a lot of noise the whole time. It's a way for a town to humiliate someone they think has done something wrong, a kind of proto-canceling.
But also, chivalry was sometimes done to couples right before or after they got married. I say was. This is still a thing in some parts of the world, including in the US and Canada, though here the rough music tends to be a little less rough. Any ritual that involves making noise around newlyweds or putting them through something a little embarrassing might have its roots in chivalry.
Chivalry is also a term of art for, like when a bunch of clowns enter a room or into a circus tent and they're all chaotic. That's sometimes called a chivalry.
And for all you word nerds out there, chivalry ultimately comes from an ancient Greek word, karabaria, which means headache. Oh, there's also an old fun adjective for a bunch of people making noise with pots and pans and the like, calathumpian. Sure, confuse and educate your neighbors with a calathumpian chivalry today.
Or don't, and that's time.
Chris, there is a moment inside of the short where they're melting the mountain around Commando Cody. And Tom says they're turning that mountain into taffy, but Crow says it's a big rock candy mountain.
It's a big rock candy mountain.
And I always thought this was a drug reference. This is a drug reference, right? Big Rock Candy Mountain?
No, it's not a drug reference. Although I know why you might think that way, because rock candy can totally be a slang term that the hip kids use for drugs. I'm told by Wikipedia. Actually, it's not Wikipedia. I found it elsewhere. But rock candy is a term that is occasionally used for crack, I'm told, crack cocaine, where it's, crystallized into something that looks like rock candy.
Rock candy being the sugar treat that we used to make as kids by putting string into a super saturated solution of sugar and water.
Exactly that. And that you might have also bought at the candy store for a nickel.
Of course, because it's old-fashioned.
Very old-fashioned, sold on a stick with a little ball at the end, a little wooden stick dowel type thing.
Get it at Colonial Williamsburg.
Oh, it's so good. I haven't had rock candy in ages.
Well, it's just sugar. You've had sugar, so you're good.
It's true, but it's jagged and fun.
It's true. There's a texture.
So that's rock candy. Although rock candy doesn't have to be on a stick or on a string, that is just one popular way to do it, and it helps teach kids about crystallization.
Crystals. Yeah,
and how they grow, and also makes them patient because it takes like a week to make rock candy.
It's true. Does it make them patient? I don't know.
I don't know either. I don't remember. I know that I did this as a kid, but I don't remember whether I got super frustrated with it or if I just went home and had Snickers while I waited.
It's true, it wasn't your only sugar source, turns out. that's not what they're talking about when they're talking about the Big Rock Candy Mountain. They're not talking about sugar candy. They're not talking about drugs. What are they talking about?
No, they're talking about sugar candy. Imagine a mountain that's made of sugar candy, that if you ever wanted a little bit of candy, you could just nibble on that mountain. Wouldn't that be cool?
I mean, I've heard this story. There's a witch. There's a witch inside that mountain, and she's going to cook me, right? Like, there are no such thing as free candy that you can have whenever you want. There's witches. There's witches.
See, this is the man trying to get you to stop dreaming big, because this is the whole thing. Big Rock Candy Mountain is a place where everything you want is right there, and there's no downside to any of it.
So it's like Willy Wonka's room inside of his factory where everything's made out of candy, and there's a chocolate river.
Yeah, but you're not going to drown in it, and you're not going to turn into a giant blueberry.
Well, of course, because I'm not Augustus Gloop, nor am I Violet Beauregard.
But even if you were, you wouldn't be punished for your hubris. This is the whole thing about Big Rock Candy Mountain. So Big Rock Candy Mountain is specifically a mythical place for hobos.
Oh.
It comes from a folk song, and the version of the song that we know and love today, those of us who know and love it, it was written by a guy named Harry McClintock. He wrote it at the turn of the century. His version of the song is on the Oh Brother, Where Art Thou soundtrack.
Oh. Yeah, I have a vague recollection. Vague, like way vague. I certainly didn't pull it out of my memory when I heard this reference watching the show today, though.
Yeah. The version that I know best is by Pete Seeger, but actually it became really popular when Burl Ives sang it around 1949.
Not when he was Frosty the Snowman.
No, but the same guy. You know, he was a big folk singer before he showed up as Frosty the Snowman. And so the whole point of this is that you've got this paradise, which is just, it's got everything you want. Let me read you some of the lyrics. In the Big Rock Candy Mountains, there's a land that's fair and bright, where the handouts grow on bushes and you sleep out every night, where the boxcars are all empty and the sun shines every day on the birds and the bees and the cigarette trees.
Whoa! Different time.
Yeah, they usually make that peppermint trees when they teach this song to kids now, but what are you going to do? The lemonade springs where the bluebird sings in the Big Rock Candy Mountains.
Huh.
In the Big Rock Candy Mountains, all the cops have wooden legs. The bulldogs all have rubber teeth, and the hens lay soft-boiled eggs.
Oh, that would be so good.
There's a lake of stew and of whiskey, too. You can paddle all around them in a big canoe in the Big Rock Candy Mountains.
What do they change the Whiskey Lake to when they teach this to kids?
I think it's sewage. No, I don't know. Yeah, so it's all these things that, in particular, a hobo might like, which still sound pretty sweet, pretty ding-dang sweet, if you ask me. And
there is a Big Rock Candy Mountain in Colorado.
There are many Big Rock Candy Mountains out in the West, and they're all named after the song.
So that's not so surprising. I mean, the one that I read about in Colorado, apparently they named one of the springs near it, the Lemonade Spring, and they called it Big Rock Candy Mountain because it was all nice and painted lots of different colors, so it looked like it could be lots of different festive things. So there's more than just the one in, Colorado?
I believe there are several, yes.
Well, I mean, I would want to name my mountain after a very good folk song.
Okay, now here's the thing. Big Rock Candy Mountain, I think, is really interesting because I am, perhaps like you were, very accustomed to these kinds of visions of paradise having a downside, right? Like you can't get what you want because either there's a bad twist to it, there's a witch hiding in that candy, or you're going to OD on it like you do in Willy Wonka.
Sure.
There's something bad about it, or you'll get bored of it. Mm-hmm. You'll be in this paradise and it'll just, you won't want to be there after a while, or it'll make you go crazy or something. There's all sorts of possibilities. And that's always how we think about paradise. And this is so much simpler. It's just no, man, what are you talking about? There's a lake made of whiskey. Calm down.
And it's sunny. Take a nap. You'll be fine.
Exactly. The boxcars are empty. Let the train rock and calm you down. It's lovely.
True. See, My big association with the Big Rock Candy Mountain, though, is from that ridiculous YouTube cartoon about Charlie the unicorn being told not to go to the Big Rock Candy Mountain and going to the Big Rock Candy Mountain anyway. And I think that's why I assumed that this was a drug reference, because what the heck? Like, there is no YouTube video with a unicorn in it that doesn't have some sort of like undercurrent of a drug reference going on. I mean, even My Little Pony, everybody. I'm just saying. So, how is this not a drug reference?
Well, alcohol is a drug,
Okay,
but
cigarettes are a drug. Sorry, peppermints are a drug.
But I will say this, come with me on this journey into history for a moment, because this is not the first fantastical paradise. It has been argued that this is based on a poem that is much older, from the 1600s, called An Invitation to Lubberland.
Lubberland?
Yes, let me read a bit of that for you. The rivers run with claret fine, so wine. The brooks with rich canary, so port. The ponds with other sorts of wine to make your hearts full merry. Nay, more than this, you may behold the fountains flow with brandy. The rocks are right refined gold. The hills are sugar candy.
Huh. That sounds like a much boozier paradise.
Well, that's just the booze portion of the poem. It goes on. And again, a lake of whiskey.
Okay, yes.
But even before then, further back in time, we can keep going back.
There's a Lubberland before Lubberland?
There is, because you can go all the way back to a medieval fantasy of a place of plenty that is always just around the corner, not too far away, where every wish could be fulfilled and the land is generous and there's no problems. And you know what that land was called?
Eden?
Cocaine.
Never mind, it is a big drug reference, everybody. I win.
No. We're not done yet.
Oh!
Let me spell cocaine for you.
Okay.
COCKAIGNE.
Wow. Now it's a sex reference.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. I don't know why we're masking it. I mean...
There's a really fun academic book that I read a while back by a guy named Herman Play called Dreaming of Cocaine, Medieval Fantasies of the Perfect Life. It's pretty approachable if anybody is really interested in this line of thinking. There is a particular poem about the land of cocaine, which talks about the monks and nuns who live there.
Monks and nuns.
There's another abbey nearby. This is a translation from the Middle English, but there's another abbey nearby, a great nunnery, in fact, up a river of sweet milk, where there is great plenty of silk, where the summer's day is hot, and young nuns take a boat and go forth on that river, rowing with oars and steering. When they're far away from the abbey, they undress to play and jump in the water and swim secretly. The young monks who see them get ready and start out and come to the nuns immediately. And each monk takes one for himself and carries his prey away quickly to the great grey abbey and teaches the nuns a prayer with their legs up and down in the air. The monk that can be a good stallion and knows where to put his hood, he can easily have 12 wives each year.
Wow, the Big Rock Candy Mountain is sounding different every time we see it in a new incarnation.
I think this is fascinating. I don't know. This idea of a paradise that has no downside is so alien to my way of thinking that it's fascinating to think of people who just insist, no, it would be fine. You can imagine a perfect world where everything is fine and you don't need to think about it.
It's totally interesting that this first version you're talking about chronologically is one that's very sex-oriented, and this one that you're talking about more recently with the hobos is very food and alcohol and candy related, and is no longer like sexy. It's just foodie.
Yeah.
It's very interesting how paradise and that vision of paradise changed.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is some food in the medieval version as well. There was the river of sweet milk, but I think in other parts of the poem there is more food around in terms of what's provided to you. But it's true that Big Rock Candy Mountain, as we know it now, is pretty sexless, which is interesting.
Interesting, yeah.
I should also say the drug cocaine is not related to the word for this medieval place. The drug cocaine is a drug that's made from the coca leaf, so it gets the INE ending like quinine or something like that. So it's cocaine. or cocaine.
Different. Yeah. Ooh, so interesting.
Anyway, that's been our little etymology corner.
There ought to be a jingle. Well, Chris, we've talked a lot about the Big Rock Candy Mountain, about monsters, about the moon, which is just about all we want to say about the movie. I don't know. Maybe you have a final factoid for our listeners?
Well, there was one other moment that I thought might be worth talking about. There's a scene where some guys with guns are walking through the swamp, and one of them turns around to face the other ones, and you can't hear them say anything, but Tom says,
Peas and carrots, peas and carrots.
and I'm curious if you know why he says that.
I have no idea. I totally wrote it down in my notes, though, like peas and carrots is in the riff, but I have no idea what this is referencing. Where does it come from?
Okay, this is a thing that comes up a few times over the course of the show as a riff, but usually they're talking about a different form of this.
Oh.
This is something which Wikipedia tells me is called walla. I've never heard that term before.
I'm sorry, it's called what?
Walla, W-A-L-L-A, as in half
like
of
Walla
Walla. Yeah, half of that.
It's just little water, not big water. Just Walla.
It's true. I've always heard it referred to by its more British name, which is rhubarb.
Oh, okay.
So rhubarb, or walla, is what you have actors say on set when they're going to be a crowd. So if you have a bunch of people and you need them to make noise, you can tell them to say some nonsense phrase like peas and carrots, peas and carrots, peas and carrots, or rhubarb, 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 or rubble, 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 things like that.
Watermelon, watermelon, watermelon.
Potentially, yes. So those are some of your options. And peas and carrots is one of those options. And so Tom is just sort of saying, I'm saying nothing, but I'm making it look like I'm talking. So just turn around and say peas and carrots to your actors a few times. And that'll be good enough for the purposes of this scene.
Mm-hmm.
Now, often in MST3K, they'll have a scene like that, and they'll all be going like rhubarb, rhubarb, crowd, rhubarb, rhubarb. They'll say things like that. So there's a British comedian named Spike Mulligan who took his name Spike from Spike Jonze, who we talked about recently. Spike Mulligan had a show called The Goon Show, and he was really fond of the joke of saying rhubarb, rhubarb, rhubarb whenever he had to make crowd noises.
Uh-huh.
And a friend of his named Eric Sykes made a short film called Rhubarb. Not to be confused with the Ray Milland vehicle about the cat who owns a baseball team.
Oh my gosh.
That's a whole different movie.
That's a whole different movie.
And as you might have guessed, the only dialogue in the short film Rhubarb is the word rhubarb.
Nice. Very nice.
You say that. He made it in 1969, and then it was remade for TV in 1979, and that's the version that I was able to find on YouTube. But critics agree, neither of these are terribly funny.
Aww.
And for what I was able to sit through from the 1979 version, yeah, I mean, I respect the idea. For the most part, it ends up just being silent comedy, right? Like Mr. Bean style, I guess, except anytime people do talk, there's a whole bit of like a church service where the choir and the priest are singing a hymn, and the hymn's lyrics are just rhubarb, rhubarb, rhubarb. Which is a funny bit, but it's not that funny to watch. I don't know why it didn't work, but it didn't.
It seems like it should work really well.
It should.
Seems really funny.
You know, I have to say, the movie with Ray Milland and with the cat Orangey, our beloved cat
Beloved Orangey.
Yeah, who owns a baseball team, that really should be a better movie than it is too. I think there's just a curse around films named Rhubarb.
Man, it's a shame because the pie is so good.
Oh, I love rhubarb. Oh.
Yeah, delicious. If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you know how to get to the Big Rock Candy Mountain, or if you'd like to ask us anything, get in touch with us. Our email is info@itsjustashow.com, and we would love to hear from you. This show is made possible by listeners like you, and like our randomly selected supporter, Jeffrey. Thank you, Jeffrey. For as little as $1 an episode, you can be like Jeffrey and help us research and record this show. You can join us in a friendly Discord, and you can listen to all our super fan bonus bits. Find out more at itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/151. Chris, we may not have traveled to the Big Rock Candy Mountain yet, but surely there's a wonderful episode waiting for us just around the corner. What are we watching next time?
We are going to be heading back into the sci-fi era for Season 10, Episode 10, It Lives by Night.
Dun, dun, dun! Excellent. It Lives by Night. So, sci-fi era. I haven't seen this. Have you seen this?
I have not watched this episode before, but I am curious because one of the people in the cast is our good friend, Michael Pataki.
Oh, well, that's going to be super interesting.
So that's what we'll be watching next time. But until then...
You seem to be excellently equipped. Thank you. I didn't think you could tell through these trousers.
I thought we weren't going to delve into ontological discourse this week. Take it away, Theme Squad.
Etymology corner. It's just a word.
Strangle, strangle, strangle.